Hi, this is Dr. Nick. I'm the incrementalist here with incremental insights for better business, better health.
And I'm Fred Goldstein with Accountable Health, here helping employers, payers, and healthcare systems work on their population health improvement programs. Now, Nick, we've been discussing some interesting stuff over the years now that we've been doing this. And something that sort of you brought up a little earlier that we discussed was this issue of workforce and training programs and differences in COVID rates that seem fascinating. I think it would be a great discussion. So, what is it?
Yeah, so lots of organizations going through the challenge of remote working. And, there are some places where you can't have remote working. You can't do training, as an example, in a remote circumstance, different places where that would occur. And to try and maximize limited capabilities. And, some of this is about the trainers and available trainers and the space and so forth. What some organizations are doing is doubling up. So by that, I mean, they're putting in shifts for training. So you train the same thing in cohorts, and you have a cohort in the morning and you have a cohort at nighttime. And in fact, if you really pushed it, you could probably have three cohorts and do three, but they're doing just two. And here was the data point. And this is a little bit anecdotal, but I thought it was really intriguing. They were seeing, so they're testing, they're doing all the right things and trying to make this as safe as possible. And they test on a regular basis. And the two cohorts, as best as you can determine, are the same. There's no sort of separation, or picking as a result. And the cohort that trains at nighttime has seen a huge higher incidence of COVID occurring upon testing of the individuals. So those individuals that test positive are taken out of the training program, get isolated, and then they get reinserted into another cohort at some point later. And the question arises, why would that be the case? Everything else is the same. They're going in the same equipment, the same place. It must be a different set of trainers because they obviously aren't working 24 hours a day. Why would that be the case?
So I'm going to throw that right back at you, Nick. With your medical expertise, et cetera, why might that be different with nighttime training versus day?
So I know we're going to talk about this, but the first thought that comes to mind as I think about this is we know that your immunity decreases at nighttime. One of the important elements that we have from a wellness and health, and it's the one that I've talked about and had a whole company that was set up around, is sleep. And if you don't get sleep or you're chronically tired, and for the most part, people that work nights tend to be chronically tired because they're not getting the best sleep. Everything is noisy, it's light, and so forth. So the first thing that occurs to me is it because that group has a poor immune response to the same challenge of exposure to essentially roughly the same experience with COVID?
And let me ask you this too. So obviously, as you said, those people who work night times have lower immunity. Is that also potentially due to the circadian rhythm stuff? Is that sort of what it ties into?
Well, I think we're still learning this. I mean, we treated all of these things as well, it just happens and we didn't really track it. But I think there's a couple of things. So there is some circadian rhythm that may contribute to it, but also sleep. Sleep is a revitalization, and it might seem a little bit surreal to sort of talk about the cells needing rest, but that's the only sort of conceptual framework that I have for this. Your immune system needs a rest, and it gets that at nighttime. If it's not getting it because you're not getting the power of sleep, and to be clear, if anybody asks, we don't really know what sleep does. We just know that it's essential for life for almost every organism on the planet. But it's like charging a battery, and it charges the immune system.
Interesting. And I understand also, as we discussed this, that the individuals themselves selected which group they wanted to be in. So some people might be more night people or not. And do you think there's anything potentially associated with the selection of that might also lead to some of this? Maybe some different behaviors based on which people like to stay up late at night versus those that like to work during the day, or?
Yeah, so that's much harder to tease out, in part because I'm not a night owl. I'm certainly an early riser. So I don't have a good understanding of those individuals. Is there something about their behavior or their lifestyle that makes them less healthy? I don't know if that's the case, but maybe that's the case. Maybe it's associated with food, for example, because you're in the nighttime cohort, you're not getting good sustenance because you don't feel hungry. That's not sort of the norm, even though you're in that fixed period. And it's training for 6 days, as I understand, and then one day off on Sunday for both groups. I don't know, perhaps that's contributing in some way.
Yeah, and I wonder also if you might see some sort of a difference in activities. So when somebody shops or something might also be an impact, or just things like that that might also cause some of these potential exposures to be higher based in one group than another because of the time of day they're doing something or things like that. It's really a fascinating problem. You could dig into this one really deep, but it would be interesting to understand it. And then also interesting, Nick, to kind of think about what would you recommend doing to try to alleviate that?
Yeah, so that I'm sure I'm sure the groups that are doing this are obviously focusing on that, because if they're seeing this big discrepancy, they're wondering, and you would look at the data and say, at what point is it occurring? Is there some sort of spike at a particular time? I don't have access to the data. I would love to do so, but that's the first thing I do to see if there's any patterns that are discernible, and are the spikes the same across the two groups? Look at the behaviors. Is there something about the transportation? Is there something about maybe the air handling is turned off at nighttime?
Great point. That's possible.
Haven't we heard and seen that? I seem to remember covering that in one of our 96 episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really a fascinating problem. It'd really be interesting because it's something you could take and begin to dig into other industries and apply across a lot of spaces once you began to understand better what were the specific things that might have caused that to happen.
Right.
Really,
And it's not just training, to be clear. I mean, think about this for
right.
any shift work. As I heard this, I'm thinking, wait a second, does this happen in hospitals? Has anybody looked at the circadian rhythm of COVID incidence of shift workers? So you have night shift workers, nurses, and so forth. Have we seen a higher incidence in them of suffering from COVID or diseases? I don't know.
It's really a fascinating question, and that you could then tease out, as you said, and get a better feel for, well, what do we need to do to solve that? I don't know that anyone's looked at it, but it'll be interesting to do some research on it and see if we can find any articles. So once again, Nick, another fantastic week discussing COVID. This is Fred Goldstein with Accountable Health. If you'd like some more information, please go to accountablehealthllc.com.
And this is Dr. Nick. I'm the incrementalist here with Incremental Insights for better business, better health.